Eleanor Vance, an old black woman, sat hunched at the defendant's table, her hands cuffed, her life hanging by a thread. The judge's face was grim, his hand already lifting the gavel, poised to deliver a life sentence that would seal her fate. Whispers slithered through the hushed courtroom, calling her a thief, a liar, a woman unworthy of mercy. Each cruel murmur was a fresh wound, twisting the knife of prejudice deeper. With her head bowed, Eleanor felt the crushing weight of judgment, her hope a flickering ember against the encroaching darkness. The judge's grave tone resonated, a prelude to the final blow. But just as the gavel began its descent, a sharp creak echoed from the back of the courtroom. The heavy doors swung inward, and two figures stepped confidently into the harsh light, their eyes fixed on Eleanor. What they revealed shook the entire room, pausing the judge's hand and bringing a sudden, shocking halt to the impending sentence. The winter that year was the kind that bit through old coats and worn shoes, a cruel architect of discomfort. Streets in small industrial towns smelled of smoke and cold steel, a pervasive scent that clung to clothing and skin. It was the kind of place where people rushed home, heads down, ignoring whoever was left behind, their breaths fogging into the frigid air like fleeting ghosts. At the end of a long, back-breaking shift, Eleanor Vance, a tired black woman in her late 50s, walked with a limp. It was a permanent companion, a legacy of years spent hunched over machinery in the steel factory, a constant ache that resonated deep in her bones. Each step was a quiet testament to endurance, a silent battle against the biting cold and the weariness that threatened to consume her. Her boss, Mr. Thorne, a man whose words were sharper than any blade, always said she was too slow, too useless, a woman lucky to even keep a job. His insults, flung across the noisy factory floor, were like stones, heavy and bruising, but Eleanor never argued. She swallowed them, letting the venom sink into the quiet resilience that had become her armor. She carried her aches, both physical and emotional, and kept her head low, moving with the practiced rhythm of a survivor. The limp, a constant reminder of the factory's unforgiving demands, was a visible sign of her long service, a testament to a life spent sacrificing her body for meager wages. Thorne's dismissive voice, a harsh echo in her mind, often tried to tell her she was worth nothing. But somewhere, deep within, Eleanor knew her worth lay beyond his cruel judgment. That night, as she made her way home, her path led her past a narrow alley behind the diner. The hum of the freezer fans mixed with the whistling wind, creating a desolate symphony. Then, a faint sound, like a shiver in the cold air, caught her ear. She stopped, her weary body momentarily forgetting its aches. There, tucked against the grimy dumpster, were two children. They were pale, shivering violently, their clothes nothing more than rags layered on bones, offering little defense against the relentless cold. The boy, perhaps 7 or 8, had his arm wrapped tightly around his younger sister, trying desperately to shield her tiny form from the unforgiving wind. Their eyes, wide and hollow in their small faces, held a profound vulnerability that pierced Eleanor's hardened heart. Eleanor stopped. She could have kept walking, the way everyone else did. The world had trained her to ignore the suffering of others, to prioritize her own survival in a harsh landscape. Her boss's words still rang in her head, a cold, pragmatic whisper. Don't waste time on strays, you can barely feed yourself. And he was right. Eleanor's meals were usually scraps, her room barely warm enough to ward off the chill. She had so little to give, so little to spare. Yet, watching those kids, their fragile existence teetering on the edge of the frozen concrete, she felt a pull stronger than her hunger, stronger than the nagging voice of self-preservation. It was a deep, resonant empathy, a recognition of a shared struggle. She knew what it meant to be discarded. Eleanor crouched, her knees creaking in protest, a sound swallowed by the wind. The children looked up, their eyes too old for their tender age, holding a silent question. You two got anywhere to go? She asked softly, her voice raspy but kind. Silence. Just a slow, hesitant shake of the head from the boy, his gaze fixed on her. Eleanor exhaled, her breath fogging in the frigid air, a visible sigh of heavy understanding. She knew what it meant to be discarded, to be invisible, to be a ghost in a world that rushed past. She couldn't leave them there. Not tonight. Not ever. It was a choice that resonated deep within her, a quiet, unshakable resolve. She reached out a calloused hand, roughened by years of labor, offering not just warmth, but a lifeline. "Come on," she said, her voice low, steady, a beacon of unexpected kindness in the gloom. The boy hesitated, his gaze still wary, accustomed to the world's indifference. But the girl, Maya, her tiny fingers slipped into Eleanor's outstretched palm, ice-cold and fragile. That was enough. That small touch, that silent act of trust, sealed something profound. Eleanor's grip tightened gently, a silent promise exchanged between them. Slowly, carefully, she guided them out of the dark alley, away from the hum of the freezer fans and the whistling wind, towards an uncertain but undeniably warmer future. The trio moved through the dim streets, Eleanor's limp a little more pronounced, but her steps imbued with a new, quiet purpose. By the time they reached Eleanor's small apartment building, nestled in a row of similar worn-out structures, neighbors peeked through cracked doors, their faces a mixture of suspicion and scorn. "That fool," one muttered under her breath to another, shaking her head in disbelief. "Old woman can't pay her own bills. Now she's dragging strays inside." The other chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "She'll sink with them," Eleanor heard. She always heard the whispers, the judgments, the predictions of her downfall. But she just kept walking, her gaze fixed forward, her hand firm on Maya's, Leo following closely behind. Two fragile lives, now tethered to hers, following her unwavering stride. Their opinions, their cruel words, held no sway over the quiet conviction in her heart. Inside, Eleanor's place was no palace. Just peeling wallpaper, a sagging couch that had seen better decades, and a single heater that rattled louder than it warmed. Still, it was shelter. It was safe. She laid blankets across the worn couch, creating a makeshift bed, and warmed some broth she'd been saving for herself. She watched as Leo and Maya ate, their small hands clutching the bowls, devouring the meager meal like they hadn't touched food in days. That night, as she sat in the corner, rubbing her aching leg, Eleanor thought about how tomorrow Mr. Thorne would mock her again, how money would stretch thinner than ever. But she also knew this. Those kids wouldn't be sleeping on frozen concrete anymore. Not as long as she was alive. And with that quiet, resolute decision, a bond was sealed. One that would echo far louder than she ever imagined. The days that followed Eleanor Vance's quiet decision were not easy. The steel factory remained a brutal canvas for her labor, its air perpetually thick with the acrid scent of burnt iron. Every clang of machinery, every groan of shifting metal seemed to reverberate deep within her bones, a constant reminder of the physical toll her work demanded. Her limp, a permanent souvenir from years of harsh industrial conditions, grew heavier with each passing shift. Yet Eleanor pushed through, her body aching, her spirit enduring. Every swing of the hammer, every lift of heavy material, was a silent battle, fought not just for survival, but for the two fragile lives now depending on her. She was a woman carved from resilience, facing down the grind with an unspoken fortitude. Her boss, Mr. Thorne, was a man whose cruelty seemed to sharpen with the factory's steel. He thrived on humiliation, a predator in a work shirt. He'd wait until the din of the factory floor momentarily subsided. Then his voice, sharp and cutting, would pierce the relative quiet. "Vance!" he'd bark across the vast space, his words carrying with malicious intent. "Even those orphans you dragged home probably move faster than you." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter would spread among the workers, some chuckling nervously, others eager to align themselves with Thorne's power. Their eyes would dart from Thorne's sneering face to Eleanor's bowed head, a spectacle of casual cruelty. Eleanor never snapped back. She simply wiped the sweat from her brow with a calloused hand, her gaze fixed on the task before her, and kept pushing, kept working. Each insult, each dismissive glare, was not a wound inflicted, but a heavy stone added to an invisible burden she carried. This weight, invisible to others, was a constant companion on her limping walk home. Yet in her heart, she knew that these burdens, this silent suffering, were not for naught. They were the price of a choice, a testament to a love that demanded sacrifice, and a quiet promise to two children who deserved more than the world had offered them. At night, however, that crushing weight seemed to lift, dissolving the moment she turned the key in her apartment door. The peeling wallpaper and sagging couch of her humble home were transformed into a sanctuary by the sheer joy that awaited her. Leo and Maya, no longer the shivering shadows from the alley, would rush to greet her, their small arms wrapping around her legs. Their bright smiles, innocent and full of unadulterated affection, were a balm to her weary soul, erasing the day's pain, the factory's cruelty, and Thorne's biting words. In their embrace, Eleanor found a strength far greater than any steel. Evenings in the small apartment became a quiet symphony of learning and discovery. Leo, always with a book clutched in his hand, would eagerly read aloud what he had learned at school, his young voice brimming with newfound knowledge. Eleanor would sit, rubbing her aching leg, listening with quiet pride as he stumbled over complex words or explained simple arithmetic. She encouraged his questions, celebrated his small victories, fostering his burgeoning intellect with gentle nods and soft words. In Leo's eager mind, Eleanor saw a future brighter than the factory floor, a testament to the power of a nurturing hand. Her younger sister, Maya, often sat at the wobbly table, lost in her own world of creation. With a dull pencil clutched in her tiny fingers, she would scribble, bringing forth pictures of houses. These weren't the dilapidated buildings of their industrial town, but homes imagined, brighter, warmer, and more colorful than anything they had ever known. Eleanor would watch her, a gentle smile gracing her lips, recognizing the hopeful spirit blossoming within the quiet girl. Maya's art was a silent, whimsical testament to the dreams Eleanor was building, brick by painful brick, for her chosen family. Eleanor's sacrifices continued, layered one upon another. When the cupboards ran thin, it was always her portion that went to the children, her hunger swallowed quietly. She patched Leo's jacket with clumsy but loving stitches, making it last another season. She saved every spare coin painstakingly for Maya's shoes, ensuring their feet were protected from the biting cold. Some nights when the rattling heater coughed and died, she would huddle the children close, pretending she wasn't cold herself, her warmth a shield against the harsh world. Every sacrifice was a silent act of love, forging a bond stronger than blood. The years folded into one another, but the whispers in the stairwells and corner shops remained a constant cold wind. Neighbors still peered through cracked doors, their judgments sharp and swift. "She'll end up on the street with them, mark my words," one woman muttered, her voice barely a breath as Eleanor passed. Another man, lounging by the butcher shop, smirked, his words laced with the venom Eleanor had grown accustomed to. "A black woman raising 2 white kids, they'll turn on her the first chance they get." Eleanor heard. She always heard, but she never paused, never met their gaze. Her head remained held high, a silent testament to a conviction far stronger than their cruel words. Instead of answering the scorn, Eleanor poured herself into her children. She taught Leo more than just school lessons. She taught him how to change a tire on their old, sputtering car, his small hands learning the stubborn mechanics under her patient guidance. She showed him how to shake a hand with dignity, a firm grip, eyes meeting another's, a lesson in self-respect no one could ever take away. For Maya, the quiet observer, Eleanor taught her how to balance coins, how to manage the meager household budget, empowering her with practical wisdom. More profoundly, she showed Maya how to stand tall, even when the world tried to shrink you, instilling a fierce inner strength. Still, Mr. Thorne never let Eleanor forget her place. He seemed to relish every opportunity to diminish her, especially when it concerned the children. One day, Eleanor approached his office, her heart heavy with concern. Maya had a persistent cough, and the clinic was her only hope. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I need to ask for a day off, to take Maya to the clinic." Thorne leaned back in his worn leather chair, a sneer twisting his lips. He let the silence stretch, savoring her discomfort. "You're not their mother, Eleanor," he finally barked, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Stop playing hero and get back to work." The words were a deliberate blow, an attempt to sever the bond he so despised. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, merely nodded, her resolve hardening. Thorne's cruel words echoed, but they did not sway her. Eleanor took the day off anyway, knowing full well the risk to her already meager wages. clutching Maya's small hand, her palm firm against the child's. Eleanor walked the long distance to the clinic. The city streets were a blur of busy feet and indifferent faces, but Eleanor's focus remained solely on the precious life beside her. In the sterile waiting room, she held Maya close, offering quiet reassurances, a silent promise that she would always put her children first, no matter the personal cost. The clinic's hushed sounds were a stark contrast to the clanging factory, but the burden Eleanor carried was just as heavy. That night, a crumpled pay slip lay heavy in Eleanor's tired hand. Mr. Thorne, true to his vindictive nature, had cut her pay in half. The injustice stung, a sharp reminder of his power and malice. But as Leo and Maya slept soundly on the sagging couch, Eleanor carefully folded the slip and tucked it deep into her pocket. She would pretend nothing had changed. She would stretch their food further, mend their clothes with even more meticulous stitches, and endure the cold silently when the rattling heater failed. She would bear this burden alone, shielding them from the worry, her quiet sacrifice a secret act of love. Years passed this way, woven with threads of sacrifice layered upon sacrifice. The children grew, their laughter filling the small apartment, their footsteps growing louder, their voices stronger. Eleanor's back bent a little more each year, her limp heavier, but her heart swelled with a quiet, persistent pride. She watched Leo pore over books, his brow furrowed in concentration, and Maya, once so quiet, now sketching with fierce determination. Her drawings no longer just of houses, but of faces, of stories waiting to be told. The apartment may have been small, but within its peeling walls, a family was forging itself, strong and true. Leo, with his sharp eyes and even sharper mind, earned scholarships that Mr. Thorne had sneered he'd never deserve. Maya, once the quiet girl with pencils, grew into a fierce voice in school debates, unafraid to challenge anyone who mocked her strange little family. Eleanor watched them with quiet pride, her own body carrying decades of labor, her back bent, her steps slower than ever. But the children stood taller. For the first time she allowed herself to believe. Maybe kindness wasn't wasted after all. Maybe it was planting something that would bloom far beyond her, a harvest she might never fully see. Her children soar, carrying Eleanor's love with them. Years continued their relentless march, but these were years marked not by struggle alone, but by the blossoming futures Eleanor had quietly nurtured. Leo, with his sharp eyes and sharper mind, had gone off to college, burying himself in the law books he'd once only dreamed of. Maya, the quiet girl with a pencil, had found her voice, chasing journalism, her fierce spirit aimed at uncovering truths. Eleanor's body was weary, her hands rough stone from decades of labor, her back bent a little more each year. Yet her heart swelled with a pride that defied physical aches, a profound joy that flowed through her with every letter that arrived, each one a testament to their thriving lives. These letters are more valuable than gold to her. Eleanor Vance's small apartment, still adorned with peeling wallpaper, became a quiet gallery of triumph. She pinned Leo's proud updates from law school and Maya's daring dispatches from journalism internships onto the faded wall, each note a precious treasure. They were more than mere paper. They were tangible proof of lives redeemed, futures forged, and the quiet testament to her unwavering love. She would run a calloused finger over the ink, a gentle, almost reverent touch, feeling the profound connection to the young adults who were now making their mark on the world, a silent, fulfilled smile gracing her lips. While Eleanor finds pride, her old boss festers in bitter envy. Mr. Thorne, however, had not softened with the passage of time. If anything, the years had sharpened his spite, honing it to a venomous edge. He hated the sight of Eleanor walking with her head held just a little higher. A quiet dignity he found insufferable. He despised hearing the whispers among the factory workers about the orphans she had taken in, making something of themselves, defying all expectations. To Thorne, it was an affront, a direct challenge to his cynical view of the world, and a personal insult that Eleanor, of all people, had found such a profound, if unconventional, victory. Thorne believes Eleanor stole something precious. Now he plans to steal her life. In Mr. Thorne's twisted perception, Eleanor's quiet happiness and the resounding successes of Leo and Maya were not a testament to her kindness, but proof of a profound injustice. To him, Eleanor had somehow stolen dignity she didn't deserve, a sense of worth and purpose that should have been denied to a woman like her. The very notion fueled a dangerous resentment within him, festering into a dark, calculating resolve. He watched, waited, and plotted, determined to strip away every shred of joy she possessed, to take back what he believed she had illicitly gained. He would take it all away. One autumn morning the trap was sprung. Eleanor Vance, her steps slower now, her back carrying the weight of decades, came home to an unsettling sight. Two policemen, their uniforms crisp and their expressions colder than the winter air she once braved, waited by her door. A neighbor, peering from behind a half-closed curtain, muttered under her breath, loud enough for the quiet street to hear, "Told you so," always knew she'd end up in trouble. The words, heavy with old judgment, hung in the crisp air, a prelude to the storm about to break over Eleanor's life. The life she had so painstakingly built was about to be shattered. The officers shoved past Eleanor, their presence an immediate violation of her modest sanctuary. They moved with a brutal efficiency, tearing through her small apartment, tossing cushions, pulling open drawers, and scattering the few cherished possessions she owned. Eleanor stood frozen in the doorway, her breath caught in her throat, watching helplessly as her home, the one place she had found solace and built a family, was desecrated. The brusque commands of the policeman echoed off the peeling wallpaper, each word a hammer blow against her fading sense of security. Disoriented and powerless, she could only watch the disarray unfold, a silent scream trapped within her. Then came the cruel, inevitable discovery. From under the sagging couch cushion, a place Eleanor herself had never looked, one of the officers pulled a small canvas bag. It was stuffed with cash, crumpled bills spilling out, alongside company equipment stamped with the unmistakable factory labels of Mr. Thorne's plant. Eleanor's breath caught, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Her eyes widened in horror. She had never seen it before. The policemen exchanged triumphant glances, their cold expressions now alight with perceived victory. The evidence, carefully planted, perfectly framed, solidified the lie. Eleanor felt the bitter taste of betrayal, a despair so profound it stole her voice. Within hours, Eleanor was in handcuffs, the cold metal biting into her wrists, a stark contrast to the warmth of Maya's tiny fingers she once held. She was led past the factory gates, the very place she had toiled for so long. There, Mr. Thorne stood, arms folded, a venomous smirk twisting his lips. He watched her, a gleam of cruel satisfaction in his eyes. "Guess kindness doesn't pay after all, Green," he sneered, his voice carrying just loud enough for the few lingering workers to hear. A few laughed uncomfortably, others simply turned away, unable to meet her gaze. Her public disgrace was his private triumph. The courtroom smelled of old varnish and settled dust, a scent that felt heavy with judgment. Eleanor sat hunched at the defendant's table, her once strong shoulders now sagging under an invisible weight. Prosecutors, sharp-suited and relentless, painted her as a bitter old woman, a thief who had stolen to survive. Witnesses, workers Mr. Thorne had quietly paid off, claimed they'd seen Eleanor sneaking around the storage rooms. Bystanders filled the benches, their whispers like a collective hiss. "I knew she was too good to be true. Those kids she raised don't even know who she really is." Eleanor felt overwhelmed, despairing, utterly isolated against the pervasive prejudice and the rigged system. Eleanor said little. She wanted to scream, to lash out at the injustice, but years of swallowing insults, of enduring in silence, had trained her too well. She thought of Leo and Maya, their faces now grown, so full of promise. She couldn't drag them into this shame. Better they stay away. Better they never see her like this, broken and condemned. When the judge's gavel struck, announcing that Eleanor faced a possible life sentence, the room seemed to close in on itself. Her eyes dropped to the floor, her heart heavy with a final, crushing truth. Perhaps Mr. Thorne was right. Perhaps a woman like her was never meant to rise above her place. When the judge's gavel was poised, threatening to shatter Eleanor's world forever, a subtle shift rippled through the hushed courtroom. The heavy oak doors at the back, which had remained firmly closed throughout the proceedings, began to creak open. Slowly, deliberately, they revealed not the stern faces of court officers, but two figures, silhouetted against the dim hall light. They stepped inside, not with hesitation, but with an unshaken confidence that instantly commanded attention. Their eyes, sharp and unwavering, cut through the sea of whispering bystanders, bypassed the shocked prosecution, and fixed directly on Eleanor Vance, a woman hunched and defeated at the defendant's table. The air, thick with despair moments before, now thrummed with an electric anticipation. Who were these unexpected arrivals? And what power did they possess to halt the grinding gears of seemingly inevitable judgment? Eleanor, who had resigned herself to a fate beyond her control, slowly lifted her gaze. Her heart, heavy with a lifetime of quiet burdens, tightened in her chest. It couldn't be. But as the figures moved further into the room, the courtroom lights caught their faces, illuminating features that were both familiar and profoundly changed. It was Leo and Maya. Not the shivering, fragile children she had once found tucked against a dumpster, but adults now, standing tall and resolute. They bore the unmistakable marks of a world she had fought to make better for them, shaped by the very sacrifices she had made, the acts of kindness she thought had gone unnoticed, swallowed by the relentless passage of time. A sting pricked at Eleanor's eyes, a sensation of awe and disbelief warring with a sudden, surging wave of hope she hadn't dared to feel. The entire room stirred, a collective gasp replacing the hushed whispers of moments before. Bystanders craned their necks, muttering in confused shock, their judgmental expressions giving way to bewildered curiosity. But no reaction was as telling as Mr. Thorne's. His smug smirk, which had been a constant, cruel fixture on his face throughout Eleanor's ordeal, faltered. His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his features for the first time. The architect of Eleanor's downfall now seemed to recognize the faces before him, and the recognition brought not triumph, but a chilling realization of impending doom. Eleanor's chest tightened further, not with despair, but with a dawning understanding. Her kindness, so long perceived as a weakness, had come full circle, and the battle, against all odds, was not yet over. The courtroom was now a low hum of restless energy as Leo, the boy who once hid in alleys with a book clutched to his chest, straightened his impeccably tailored suit jacket. He strode forward with a commanding presence, his voice, when he spoke, steady and clear, echoing through the chamber. "My name is Leo Vance," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the stunned prosecution, "and I represent the defense." He then laid a stack of legal files onto the table with a decisive thud, their thickness promising a formidable fight. The pages rustled, a testament to countless hours of relentless work. Eleanor watched him, a tremor running through her weary body. The boy she had saved, the mind she had nurtured, was now her lawyer, ready to fight the impossible battle. Across the gallery, Maya, the quiet girl who once scribbled dreams of warm houses, moved with purposeful intent. She positioned herself, her small digital recorder flashing a steady red light, signaling that every word, every nuance was being captured. She wasn't merely an observer. She was a witness, a chronicler, a force. Her articles had already rattled powerful names in the city, exposing truths few dared to touch. Now her keen journalistic eye, her sharp pen, and her unwavering resolve were aimed squarely at Mr. Thorne, documenting every detail of the unfolding drama. Eleanor knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that Maya intended to expose the full, bitter truth of his malice. The courtroom was buzzing now, restless as Leo straightened his tie and stepped forward. Gone was the timid boy who once hid in alleys. He stood tall, voice steady, introducing himself as Eleanor's defense attorney. Papers slammed onto the table, files thick with evidence. Grace positioned herself in the gallery, recorder flashing red. She wasn't there just to watch. She was documenting everything. Her articles had already rattled powerful names, and now her pen was aimed squarely at Mr. Thorne. The prosecution tried to keep momentum, but Leo cut through their case piece by piece. Witnesses who claimed they saw Eleanor steal faltered under his questions. One stammered, admitting he'd only heard rumors. Another contradicted his own testimony when pressed. Leo exposed the cracks like a surgeon opening wounds, the prosecutor's confidence visibly eroding with each calculated query. And then came the bombshell. Maya rose, requesting permission to share a report. Her voice, firm and clear, cut through the tension. It detailed Mr. Thorne's history of wage theft, harassment, and falsified accounts at the factory, backed by documents she'd unearthed as a journalist. Murmurs swept the room, growing into a wave of gasps. Mr. Thorne's face flushed a deep, enraged red, his fists clenching white at his sides. He looked as if he might erupt, but the weight of undeniable truth held him silent. Eleanor sat frozen, blinking against the sting in her eyes. She had thought the children she saved had outgrown her, moved on into brighter worlds. But here they were, fighting with fire she had unknowingly passed down to them. The judge leaned back, tapping a pen, weighing the storm unraveling in front of him. The evidence, meticulously presented by Leo and Maya, was irrefutable. "It seems," he finally said, his voice echoing with a somber gravity, "this entire case was built on manipulation." He looked first at Eleanor, then at a defeated Mr. Thorne. "The charges are dismissed." Gasps of shock and relief rippled through the courtroom, quickly followed by a wave of applause. A few jeers were aimed at Mr. Thorne as he stormed out, his face a mask of impotent rage, defeated by the very lives he had sought to destroy. Eleanor, still processing the impossible, felt a lightness she hadn't known in decades. Leo placed a gentle, firm hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Maya moved beside her, her voice a tender whisper that cut through the lingering courtroom din. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Mom." That single word, Mom, echoed louder than the gavel that had just freed her. It was a word Eleanor had never dared to claim, a bond she had forged through sacrifice, now openly acknowledged. Neighbors who once mocked fell silent, their judgment replaced by awe. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the moment. And Eleanor, old and weary, finally allowed her back to straighten, her eyes to meet the world. A lifetime of quiet burdens began to lift, replaced by a profound, overwhelming love. She had once lifted 2 children out of the cold, out of the shadows of an alley. 20 years later, they had lifted her out of a cage, out of the shadow of a life sentence. Because kindness doesn't die, it waits, it grows, and when the time is right, it saves. When Eleanor chose compassion decades ago, she never imagined it would one day return to save her life. This story reminds us that every act of compassion plants a seed that might return when we need it most, blooming into an unseen harvest of love and justice.